benefit fraud, as part of all this, is predicted to increase by 5%, costing the country an extra £2 billion a year.
Well, the Department of Work and Pensions says it's because Britain's become more tolerant of dishonesty and people are more willing to cheat and steal. Well, we're joined now by the Work and Pensions Secretary, Liz Kendall. Good morning to you.
Morning.
What do you think, then, is behind this? I mean, it could be, as well, people are finding life really hard at the moment. Cost of living crisis, they look at the system, they think that things aren't fair. It is a difficult time for people, isn't it? What are you going to be doing about this?
Well, you probably know that this report comes from the previous Conservative government at their time in office, and I think the findings were from research about attitudes right in the middle of the COVID pandemic. I believe we need to spend every single penny of taxpayers' money wisely. I think it is unacceptable that under the Conservatives we saw £40 billion wasted on fraud over the last Parliament. We're determined to crack down on that, and you'll be hearing more from us about that in future. But today, the new Labour government is focusing on how we help people get work and get on in work. The vast majority want to do. We think too many people have been written off by the last government. We've got 2.8 million people now, almost record numbers, out of work due to long-term sickness, a similar number who are in work, who are at risk of falling out, and 1 in 8 young people not in education, employment or training. That's not good enough. It's not good for them. It's not good for businesses who want to recruit, and it's not good for the economy. So our focus today is how we are going to achieve a big, bold new ambition of an 80% employment rate to drive growth, improve living standards and drive poverty down.
Let's come back briefly to benefit fraud. There'll be people watching this right now who are screwing the system. And they'll have just heard you say, we're going to be coming after you, we're going to crack down on you, and they'll be thinking, yeah, come and get me, it's easy. What exactly are you going to do to catch these people?
Well, you'll hear more details for us soon on our programme on fraud. I think this includes not only individuals, but crucially organised crime. I don't know if you saw, Richard, a really appalling story about organised criminal gangs based in Bulgaria ripping off the system for millions of pounds. We have got to deal with that. I think that we need to use data and technology. We've got to make sure we've got the right frontline people actually really cracking down on it. And we've got to use the experience of our work coaches in job centres. That's really, really important. Okay. We want to make sure every penny of public money is used wisely, yes, and that the Department for Work and Pensions actually does what it says on the tin, which is get people into work and on in their work. Okay.
Talking
That's this government's mission.
About spending taxpayers' money wisely, if we can turn to the two-child benefit cap at the moment, your colleague Bridget Phillipson said yesterday that the government would consider scrapping the cap, but it would be expensive to do so. It sort of points to a change in position on this. It's your department. Could we see it lifted then?
Bridget, Keir, Rachel and I are all in the same place on this. We want to drive down child poverty. You know, the last Labour government lifted more than 500,000 children out of poverty, whereas the last Conservative government has plunged more than 700,000 children into poverty.
Yes, well, this would raise hundreds of thousands of children out of poverty overnight, wouldn't it?
But we also know that we're elected on a promise that we will only make promises we know that we can deliver. That is why all of our proposals in the manifesto and the campaign are fully costed and fully funded.
Okay,
but we have, let me just say here, we have taken immediate action on this. I called in child poverty experts and campaigners within my first week. The Prime Minister has established a new task force right across government to drive down child poverty, backed up by a new child poverty unit. We are getting going immediately. You'll hear more from us soon. We'll look at all the levers at our disposal, not just household income, but employment, childcare, housing and education too. That's how we turn this tide round.
What would you say to the nearly 70% of our viewers this morning, because we've run a phone poll on this, or an internet poll on this, nearly 70% of them do not think that the two-child benefit cap should be lifted. They think collectively that if you have more than 2 children, that's down to you. You need to pay your own way and not rely on the taxpayer. I mean, that's a pretty heavy result for you if you are going to lift the cap.
I think your viewers will also believe that children deserve the best start in life, and that if children grow up in poverty, it's bad for them now, but it also affects their future life chances, their ability to get well-paid jobs and get on at work, and that costs us all. Look, I am under no illusions about the scale of the task we face. I have got 1 in 3 children in my city growing up in poverty. I chair Feeding Leicester, the programme to end hunger in my city. We have got food banks in our schools. That is not good enough. We have got people queuing up at food banks and businesses crying out for people to work. It's broken. We need change, and that's the plans we're setting out today.
You say that everything's been costed. Pay talks begin today with the train drivers and the junior doctors, pay talks between them and the government. The assumption is that you're going to offer both those sets of workers more money than the Conservatives were prepared to offer. I'm not asking you for the figure because you won't give it to me, but you are going to be offering them more than the last government offered, aren't you?
Look, as I've said to you, Richard, we will only set out promises we know we can deliver. The Chancellor said at the weekend, we really value public servants. They have bust a gut in very difficult circumstances over the last 14 years. We need to recruit and retain those workers, but we have also set out iron discipline and our fiscal rules, because I think what we've seen too much over the past 14 years is promises made and promises broken. And I don't want to look people in the eye after all these years and give them false promises like the Tories did.
You've got to nail these strikes, haven't you? Politically, it's essential that you kill these strikes.
It's essential for people. It's essential for the people who face misery on the railways. It's essential for people who've had their operations cancelled because the last government refused to sit down with the junior doctors. It is essential. It's not about politics here. It's about real people's lives. It's the lives of our public servants, and it's the lives of people who use services. We want to solve this, and that's what we're determined to do.
Thank you for your guest appearance on this programme for the first time as a government minister.
I hope to be back soon.
As a government minister.
I hope to be back soon.
I'm sure you will. I'm sure you will.
Thanks very much for joining us this morning. That's Liz Kendall there.
The Work and Pension Secretary, Liz Kendall, refused to commit to lifting the two-child benefit cap until she says the government can afford it. So what do you think? Do you think it's time to scrap the cap? We're debating that now with business owner True Powell, who says the limit has to be removed. But former Tory advisor Charlie Rowley says that the cap is fair enough. Why do you think we should lift it now? Because most of our viewers think it should stay.
Well, there's some debates that I think is... when I get called, I think, wow, are we really discussing this? There's 4 million children at the moment in poverty. This affects 1.6 million children. If we scrap the cap, then we can take children out of poverty. I think 250,000.
Well, we're discussing it to answer your question because it's our money.
Yeah.
You know, it's taxpayers' money. What do you say to those who say, fine, we're happy to subsidise 2 children, but once you go beyond 2, really, it's up to you. That's your choice.
But that's not necessarily going to take children out of poverty. The focus here should be the children. It's not the children's fault. They didn't ask to be born. So I think we should be doing what we can to take kids out of poverty. And we know that when kids are out of poverty, what kids will be, you know, that when they're fed, when they feel comfortable, they will grow up to have good jobs and so forth.
You speak from personal experience, don't you?
I absolutely do. You
How many siblings have you got?
I'm one of 7, and if child benefit was taxed or capped at the 2 of us, then we wouldn't have been able to make ends meet. So I understand the plight that some parents are facing, and I think this absolutely should be scrapped.
OK, Charlie, let's come to you in that case. When we look at, you know, the benefits that lifting the cap would have for families, it would instantly take hundreds of thousands of children out of poverty. Is it the right thing to do in your mind?
Well, look, I think we've got to remember why the cap came in the first place, because the economy was in a bit of a state back in 2010. And so if you lift the cap, it's got to be on an affordable basis. And I think it's absolutely right that Liz Kendall, the Work and Pension Secretary, herself said that, you know, you've got to make sure that every penny of taxpayers' money is affordable and is costed and is going into the right places. And I think it is just reasonable as a collective, you know, taxpayers, as we all are, that one once you've had 2 children and you've received state support, that actually, if you're going to have a 3rd or 4th child, that actually you take the responsibility.
What about his counterpoint to that argument and to the argument which most of our viewers are making as well this morning, is that it's not the kids' fault. They didn't ask to be born. And if they're suffering because their parents basically had too many kids, they shouldn't have to bear that burden.
Well, because there are many other ways of support. So, you will have breakfast clubs at school, you will have after-school clubs, you will get 30 hours free childcare. There are other things, being in work, alleviates poverty. It isn't just a benefit cap of 2 children that is going to alleviate poverty. There are many other things that we can do as a society. But in order to get people out of poverty, you've got to have a strong economy. You've got to have people in the workforce.
True. What would you say? You said you can't understand why we're even debating this. As far as you're concerned, it's a done deal. What would you say to that counter-argument that, OK, yeah, it would be great if we could afford it, but we can't afford it. We just can't afford it. Where's the money going to come from?
Well, I would say, this is the government's job, and it's their job to find solutions. When we were in COVID, they found a solution with the furlough. We spent money, and whether you avoid this or not, we spent £100 million for one day on the coronation. We can find the money, the government can find the money, and it's their job to do that. This is children's lives on the line, and we can overnight take 250,000 children out of poverty.
But this is the...
If we
Charlie,
remove
lives on the line.
This is the thing, the government can find the money, but that means more borrowing, more debt, more taxes, and that means that will have to be paid for by children and the next generation.
Okay.
So it is a conundrum for the government.
We are running out of time, but should we take a look at the poll? Because we asked you if the 2-child benefit cap should be scrapped. Let's see what the result is now. 70% of you saying no. Thank you both for joining us.
Crystal clear.
This morning.